So, I'm going to walk you through in today's video why the traditional job search doesn't really work and what I've used to get multiple roles and been successful in my approach to the job search, and basically explain a different approach to finding your dream roles. Now, I'm going to focus on tech because that's my area that I work in, and that's the area that we as a company work in to help people. So, right now, if you look at this initial diagram right here, this is kind of the traditional approach to finding a job. All right, very simple. There's you have a resume, you have a cover letter, whatever, standard resume package. And there's everyone else. I put hundreds of people here. If you go on LinkedIn, you'll see that a lot of tech roles get many applications. At least tens of other people are applying, if not hundreds. And what happens is everyone, including you, gets funneled into an initial recruiter screen, the dreaded ATS system, and they filter by keywords or they use some sort of ATS approach in order to filter out a certain number of applicants. So you can see here there's a certain percentage that drop out based off of, your qualifications, whatever. And the important thing to note here is that it is insanely hard for a recruiter to look at your resume and look at everyone else's resume and pick out how your resume is different from their resume. So essentially, it becomes a homogeneous stack where the recruiter is trying really hard to pick out you or someone else from a heap of like hundreds of resumes. So you can obviously see that there's going to be a pretty substantial dropout in this element of the system. Then by some chance you manage to get through this part of the system, then you go on to the hiring manager screen. And again, this is like the same problem. It's really hard for the hiring manager to pick you out compared to everyone else. Really hard to distinguish yourself. And essentially, you're basically leaving up to chance whether or not they pick your resume out of the pile. Now, I'm not saying that it's purely random chance. Obviously, qualifications have some element to do with this, but I think it's pretty fair to say that it is pretty tough for a recruiter or a hiring manager to distinguish you from the hundreds of other people that are applying to a particular role. It is fairly challenging, and especially based off of just like a resume. Pretty hard to pick you out. And again, through this, there is a certain percentage dropout. And then eventually you get to the interview, and if you get through the interview, you get a job offer. Now, what we find is that, for the most part, this is a numbers game. It turns into a numbers game because you can see pretty clearly that the odds that your resume and you get picked out of a stack of like hundreds of other resumes of fairly undistinguishable people, it's hard to pick you out. You're going to find that your chances of getting picked for an interview are fairly low. And that's why you see a lot of frustration and anxiety and just general hatred of the traditional job process, because it is really hard to stand out in a stack of a lot of other people, and quite frankly, it is exhausting, and it requires a ton of energy too. So, all in all, it's really not the most effective way to approach the job search. I mean, yes, can there be success? Yes, I'm not saying no, that there can never be success through this approach. All I'm saying is that it is really hard, really painful, and quite frankly, not a lot of fun. So, we at the Tech Biz Club kind of wanted to provide a different approach to this. we understand that people want to get into, desirable tech jobs. Maybe you want to be a software engineer, or you want to be a product manager, or you want to be a data scientist, or something along those lines. But you don't want to spam hundreds of resumes and then pray that your resume gets picked. We just find that to be a really uninformative and, quite frankly, difficult exercise. So that's why we kind of came up with our different approach. And obviously, this is not just our approach, others have used this as well. But personally, I found for myself that this has been a pretty good way to approach the job search. And I've also used this for internships as well. So this is a bit of the easier route. And you have to understand what the goal is here. The goal here is to get a hiring manager or the owner of a particular position to take notice of you and say, hey, let's say your name is Sally or Bill or whatever. Sally, let's interview her. Or Bill, let's interview him. And they pick you for the resume. Because the hardest part in the entire process is just getting your resume selected for an interview, getting picked for an interview. Because there's a million guides out there on how to create a resume, how to do well in an interview. You can get hundreds of books on that. It's of so much availability out there on that. But we find personally that the hardest part is actually getting selected for the interview. Like, that's the hard part. And we just want to present a route that I personally have found to be helpful for me. And also I've seen others apply this and have success in their job search. So we just wanted to present this alternative. And that's why we say it's the easier way. And what we advocate for is networking. Warm networking. Now, when people think of networking, they think of things like going to a job fair and handing out 100 resumes and sweatily shaking the hands of hundreds of hiring managers at the job fair and trying, hopefully, for them to take notice of you. And that can be done. It does work for some. But honestly, it's the same thing as just submitting your resume into a stack. Because instead of, just doing it virtually through a computer, you're just doing it in person. And it's really hard, again, to pick out you amongst the hordes of other people who have come and spoken to them at that particular job fair. So that's why a lot of people experience frustration with that process as well. So what we advocate for is a different approach. It's called warm networking, and it's part of our network into tech system. That's a bit more of our premium offer. We can discuss that later. But really, what this approach is you. This is you. Notice I haven't put hundreds of other people here. It's just you. And the whole goal is for you to locate employees working at your dream company in your dream role. Like, let's say your dream role is being a software engineer at Amazon, something like that. Your goal here is to locate lower level employees or higher level employees working your dream job and messaging them, either through like a LinkedIn, or if you have like an alumni database of emails that are available through your university, or you just know them through your own network. And the whole goal is to message them. And the whole goal of that purpose is to just have a conversation with them. It's not to immediately go jump down their throat and say, hey, I need a job, please hire me. The whole goal is to really provide value to them and learn about the role and learn about what they do and learn about how to best position yourself for such a role. Because people really don't want to just be like sold to. They don't really enjoy that process. they don't really want to be sold to or, forced to make a decision whether to refer you on. They really want to just be, have a networking conversation with them, a warm networking conversation. And then if you have enough of these conversations and you maintain the relationship over a period of time and they get to know you, you can then ask them whether they would be willing to, you can say something like, hey, I'd love to learn more about the application process or what I can do and stand out in the heap of applicants. Would you mind forwarding me to your hiring manager, or would you mind whoever recruited you, would you mind introducing me so I can have a conversation with them? And then you have a conversation with the hiring manager. Again, the goal is not to be pushy and say, hey, please give me a job. The whole goal is to really just have a conversation with people, get to know about what's involved in working in a company. Just introduce yourself and just make yourself come off as knowledgeable and interested and, desirable for a particular role. And then the hiring manager then knows you. And they may know other hiring managers who are hiring at that particular moment. And then they may end up being your advocate within the company to help you get a role within that particular firm. So that's just how we approach it and how I've approached it. It's more about, finding the right people, turning them into advocates for you, and then eventually, over time, that can help you in, locating your job or locating your tech job. It just is, I'm not saying it's 100% a guarantee, but all I'm trying to point out here is just so much of a nicer way of approaching things. It's a more cleaner and efficient way of approaching things rather than just, spamming resumes and praying that someone picks your resume. I just find that, it's unproductive and quite frankly unfulfilling and not something that a person who's looking for a higher level job, necessarily wants to do. So, again, this brings me back to the concept of cold applying versus warm applying. And what cold applying is basically, like I said, spamming resumes. And the reason why this doesn't really work is because, first of all, it is low trust. The hiring manager has low trust in you. They have really fairly limited knowledge about you. They don't have much familiarity with you. And again, like I said, it is really hard to distinguish yourself. So you can see, you can think of this similar to just having a cold call or sending cold emails, concepts like that. There's going to be a lot of rejection in that process because there's low trust. They don't really know you. For the most part, they really don't know you. And if they don't know you, like you, or trust you, they may not like you. They just don't really know you. So it's really hard for you to stand out and get picked. Versus warm applying, where, if you've spoken to the hiring manager in charge, they have higher trust in you, presumably, if you have a good conversation with them, which we talk about later. They have good familiarity with you. They have higher familiarity with you, good knowledge about you, and you can stand out a bit more in the application stack. Because then once your resume comes along, either it's been referred or you've been advocated for by someone else, then they know you. And they're more likely to say, hey, this is Sally, she spoke to me, maybe let's interview her. I'm not saying it's going to be a guarantee that it's going to happen, but it's just, your chances go up by just having more familiarity with the hiring manager. At least that's what I've experienced. And that's why I wanted to create this video, is to kind of help others with this process.